Afternoon, everybody. Here's our little visual for the day. All right? You'll be hearing a lot of that over the next several weeks. I want to begin by, first of all, thanking and commending the Budget Chair, Mark Leno, and the entire Budget Committee for doing an outstanding job in the most difficult of circumstances and being asked to make the kinds of difficult cuts that no one would make in ordinary times. They stepped up and they did the right thing by the state of California. And I just want to say thank you. This is a very important step and stage of the budget process because everything up to now has been a lot of argument and a lot of debate. But for the first time here, both on the Assembly side, but we'll talk about the Senate side here, we have taken real action. And it is action that is painful, but it is action that is necessary. And now we move to the next stage, the Joint Senate Assembly Conference Committee, which Senator Leno will lead on the Senate side. And it is now time to final up the work on the cut side, but it's also time. It is also time for the entire legislature, including the Republicans, to allow the people a voice, to allow the people a right to vote. And I know there has been a lot of news this week about who's in the negotiation and who's out of the negotiation, and whether or not some of our colleagues want to participate. That's not a reason to block the public from participating. And that is only fair, especially given what the legislative analyst has said is the likely impact and the likely result of not giving the people a voice and the choice to move forward and move California forward. Last comment, and I'll turn it to Senator Leno. Step back for a moment and look at the big picture. The public, I think, is telling us loud and clear, do all that you can that is fair and reasonable to put this fiscal crisis behind us. The people are tired of it. They don't want to hear about it, read about it. They don't want it to rear its ugly head year after year after year. And in fact, they want us to focus on building a greater California, on education, on clean energy, on health care. We have a chance to do that with this framework and this proposal. We have to capture the moment and seize the moment and get the people's work done. Senator Leno.
Thank you, Senator Steinberg. Let me start off by returning the compliment. This is accomplished only because of your leadership, truly. And let me also say the governor's leadership. The work of our committee hardly happened in a vacuum. It's because there was a very thoughtful and honest proposal put forward by the governor in January, which we embraced in its framework and said from the start, we will hit your number, Governor, and we have hit his number. Now it has moved just a bit as a result of his decision to not proceed with the sale leaseback. So the new number then is $27.6 billion. In the past 3 days, our budget committee has cut $12.6 billion in state spending. We have matched that with $12 billion, the governor's entire revenue package. We took it whole, and then another $3 billion or so in other solutions, mostly in fund transfers. So we have stayed within that framework. We worked hard with very talented staff who know these very complex issues, especially in the health and human service arena, so expertly, so that we could best describe soften the edges of some of the most harsh and cruel cuts that we were considering. This does, here as we are complimenting each other, it does not go unsaid that because of the fact that $40 billion of expected revenue check it out, the legislative analysts had projected as recently as 2 years ago that in the budget year of 2011-12, there would be $125 billion in our general fund. We're at $85 billion. So a full third of our revenue has just evaporated, both as a consequence of the international fiscal crisis and, of course, as a result of Governor Schwarzenegger's elimination of the vehicle license fee. But because of that, we have a serious revenue problem. There's no longer debate, is this a spending or a revenue problem? It's a revenue problem, which then caused a spending problem. We have resolved that spending problem through the governor's proposal of a balanced approach. So, as I was about to say, millions of Californians will be very severely impacted by this. And it's an unfortunate fact of life because of that evaporation of the $40 billion. But this is a given. We know that people are suffering because of our high unemployment rate, because the private sector has retracted so significantly. So it is now the next phase of addressing the governor's proposal, and that's the revenue side. I had said earlier in committee that resolving a budget as complex as Californians is really second-grade arithmetic. Addition, subtraction. We've taken care of the subtraction side. We have approved to put forward to the voters the revenue side of this, but they go hand in hand. And noting that my Republican colleagues did not support the redevelopment proposal, that's $1.7 billion. That's a hole in their side. They did not support any number, they did not support the revenue package. So that's worth another $12 billion. Question is, how are you going to resolve that? We have put forward a very solid, honest, direct proposal to put before voters. And with regard to the pledge, and I would suggest that if we all make reference to it, you might want to actually pull out, and we could probably provide it for you. What is that pledge that our Republican colleagues have signed? In rough terms, it says something like, and I've had it before me too, because Grover Norquist has sent it to my desk as well.
You didn't sign it, did you?
I'll have to check. I don't think so. The pledge is that I, as a legislator, will never, even in times of emergency, ever vote for a tax. So how would anyone interpret that pledge as to not letting the people have a right to vote? I don't think anyone could read the words in that pledge and reach that conclusion. Who has reached that conclusion is Grover Norquist himself. So he sent word from his penthouse in Washington, D.C., that anyone who would let the people vote will have crossed his pledge. This is madness, folks. How is it that Grover Norquist, who is Grover Norquist, and why is he having his way with the state of California? The people of California should have their way with the fate of California. And that's where we are right now. So I have not given up hope. In fact, I am very confident there will be bipartisan, necessary 2/3 support to get the revenue side of this package of $27.6 billion of resolution to, I've got revolution on the mind, to the ballot.
Thank you. Glad to answer your few of your questions. I want to reiterate one point because that Mark made that I think is really important. The redevelopment piece, which we know is controversial, but I think it's also illustrative of the challenge here, because you have the minority party, which, contrary to some recent statements, is in fact relevant. Number one, they have a point of view, which ought to be heard. And number two, the 2/3 requirement gives them a major seat at the table. For them to reject the $1.7 billion of savings resulting from a tough decision to eliminate redevelopment, we all have good redevelopment projects in our districts, means that there's another from their perspective, there's another $1.7 billion of a hole to make up somewhere. Governing is about making choices. What Governor Brown has done for us and for the state of California is he has put out an honest proposal that forces the choice. And I think he will continue to reiterate, and we will reiterate, that we ought to give people the choice to determine what they want when it comes to education and public safety and health care. The 1.7 is really illustrative of the fact that we need our colleagues on the other side of the aisle to get involved in the difficult prioritizing that is essential if you're going to govern and you're going to lead, especially during difficult times. Questions?
Senator Leno, you said that you were optimistic that you were going to get a bipartisan two-thirds approval for the tax extension vote.
Yes.
What gives you that optimism, given the public comments that we've heard from the Republicans?
It's my nature and also a requirement of my job to be optimistic and positive. I just can't believe that when it comes down to that vote, that my Republican colleagues would let that which the LAO has suggested will happen if we have to find another $12 billion in cuts.
But wouldn't that give the Republicans what they say they want, which is more cuts?
Let me try on that one. I think the secret here, and it's spoken about sometimes, is that with few exceptions, no one will stand behind $25 billion worth of cuts. This isn't a partisan statement. This is the reality of what it takes to fund schools, to fund public safety in Democratic and Republican districts. We've been very careful, Senator Leno and I and our caucus, to not point fingers, to not say, take our word for it. We refer back to the LAO letter of this week and simply say the facts speak for themselves. And that the people ought to be able to look at that kind of information and ought to be able to make their own choice.
Darrell, could you just talk briefly about what you think when you saw Senator Dutton's comments to the B? You don't need us. You only need us to raise taxes. You don't need us to govern.
I was disappointed. And I know that sometimes people get under the glare of the lights there, and it doesn't quite come out the way that maybe they wanted it to come out. But I do think that it is reflective. I don't think of a number of members in Senator Dutton's caucus, by the way, but it is reflective of a long-held sentiment and belief that, this is your problem. Well, it's our problem. And I respect Senator Dutton's view of the world. And he has a whole lot to offer. But the public and the voters elected Jerry Brown as governor. They elected Democrats in every statewide office and returned large majorities to the legislature. So my message to our Republican colleagues is, we want to talk with you about things that you think will help California achieve fiscal stability. We're willing to talk about a reasonable list around pensions and around around the business climate and around spending, making sure that we keep spending in line. We already have done it. If you want to look at the proposition on the 2012 budget, we're willing to talk about that. But don't overreach, and don't assume that you can have it all your way. At the same time, you have an obligation to help move this state forward. And I'll repeat it again, regardless of whether any of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to participate, that's not a reason to block the public from participating.
John, we hear often from our colleagues in their resistance to offering the necessary votes to get the revenue measures to the ballot that the people have already spoken. The people have already spoken very recently, not only to the consequence that Darrell has just enumerated, but also, as we remember, candidate Brown was rather circumspect in saying much during the campaign, and I'm sure it frustrated all of you. One thing he was very clear about: I will support no revenue, no taxes not supported by the voters. So his theme during the campaign was, if we're going to talk about taxes, let the people vote. And
he
all he's
won.
doing, and he won with a significant majority. All he's doing now is delivering on a campaign pledge that I want to resolve this budget, 50% cuts, 50% revenue, but I won't do it myself or with the legislature. Let the people vote. That was Jerry's message during the campaign. He's fulfilling that promise now. We, the Democratic legislators, want to be his partner in doing that.
Which is why we are stepping up again and agreeing to cuts in areas that we would never contemplate in any other time.
On that point, for those of you who've been around for a while, you probably remember that on many of these very difficult cuts, and you know the ones I'm talking about, the Budget Committee often punted to the Conference Committee because we didn't want to take those votes. So it's actually uncommon that we would have concluded Budget Committee work on the budget with a completely balanced budget. That usually happens in conference. We have done it because we wanted to stand by our partner, the governor, in resolving this crisis.
Can you go over your reading of the numbers again? You're saying 12 billion in cuts. And
12 billion, 12 billion is the governor's revenue package.
And what the Senate has just concluded is
91.
4.5 billion in spending cuts.
12.6 in cuts.
We're 91 million below the governor's cut level. 91 million.
Within rounding errors, we are right in step with the governor, and that is, again, 12.6 billion in cuts. His entire revenue package, 12 billion. There's also the 2 billion for Prop 98 schools, and then about 3 billion in fund transfers and other solutions.
What do you hope to come out of conference next week? I was talking with someone in Nielsen, and he was saying he'd like to see more meat on the bones in terms of redevelopment and realignment. Are those things that might come up in conference?
The governor's told us, the Department of Finance told us any number of times through our hearings that within the week or so, we should have much more detail on the very issues that you brought up, some of the trickier and detail-oriented proposals, redevelopment and realignment.
I need to excuse myself. Senator Leno, I know, could stay till 7 tonight, but I have to excuse
You wanna have
myself
dinner?
for a speech. Any last question for me before I go?
The governor was downstairs with a bunch of trinkets on his table and talking about 7.5 million over 4 years in spending reduction, or in expenses that have been accrued, I guess, for these trinkets, right? And says he's putting a ban on that. Do you think that that focus takes away any of the attention on these massive cuts and agreements that you focus on here? Is he distracting from the real?
No. I mean, I think symbolism is important. I think that it's about the big issues, but it's also about sending the right signals. And I think he's doing a fine job of that. Okay, thanks.
Thank you all.